Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the monthly dragon. I've been waiting for this for a long time, basically a month around. So happy to be here again. Hi,
We
Chris.
certainly are on. Okay, now I've selected something for us this month. I've got three wonderful features about this game that just I
Ooh.
could not resist including in. It's not necessarily a top Titanic tussle, but it's got lots of points that I would like to bring to everybody. And first of all, Anna, I could not resist including a game with the name of the player with the white pieces here, Max Weidenhoefer. Hoofer.
Max Weidenhoefer.
Yeah,
Interesting name because why do I know this name? First of all, he was streaming. He's a streamer for
the
the
streamer.
ChessNerd. Who's a quite popular streamer online, and he is taking over and even probably training with him. So they're in contact, and he very recently played against one of the Botus sisters.
Oh my word.
Yes, yeah, that's why this name rings a bell, definitely.
Well, I certainly don't want to be upsetting him if he's a YouTuber. But
If
so
you
I'm going to be
watch this,
very
Max.
I'm going to be very polite to him, but that name was just absolutely amazing. He's actually playing in this game against a Latvian grandmaster whose pronunciation I probably better not attempt that one either, actually being English. So the fact is, I will leave that to you. But you've got to admit, I'm actually quite good to you, Anna, because I've watched a couple of your videos with Svetlana. Is it Svetlana?
Svetlana, yeah.
She puts you through the ringer, doesn't she? It's like
Everybody
question
does.
after question. Barra, and all I ask you for is the odd pronunciation. Right. Anyway, let's crack on. And the second thing
Oh
that I
God,
wanted.
I'm just laughing because I read the name. So okay, no.
Okay. So the second thing is that I would like to talk about is this: the Sicilian Dragon. But everybody, you can still play the Sicilian Dragon and not enter all the theoretical lines. There's ways that you can play around the edges. There's little systems that are not as well known, and this is actually going to be just one of those systems. For example, even of course, you'll know we've had some questions recently about the so-called Hungarian Dragon H5, and next week I'm going to do a bit of a focus. Next time, I'm going to focus on the Hungarian Dragon and do a little summary where we're at, what's going down,
I
and
love
answer one or
it.
two questions that have come that way. That's the Hungarian Dragon. It's also very possible, of course, to play what's called the Dragadorf, or even the accelerated Dragadorf, where you do it without putting the bishop on g7. And the idea is to develop your queenside pieces in the same way that black might do in the Sicilian Nidal.
It is interesting, yeah. It is daunting because the king will stay in the middle for quite some time.
Well,
So,
did you say did you use the word daunting?
I think
Is that
so,
the
yeah.
word? Right. No, I'm not. What I'm saying is you're absolutely right, but that is one of the attractions of playing it so that you don't get checkmated on the king side.
Yeah, at
So what
least,
I
yeah.
would actually suggest is if you're going to play one of these little offbeat systems, then just keep the king in the middle for a while and castle when it's safe to do so. Otherwise, you need to be with it. So I'm all for taking on the challenge head on. Castle, attack me, I'll attack you. Let's go for it. But you can still play the opening without entering those critical lines, as this game is going to show. So at the
Okay.
moment, it's all chuggling along nicely. We have a Yugoslav attack. Here we go. And we just normally expect black to castle, white to castle. And then you probably remember that d5 move is the most critical line. But look at what happens now. H5.
There we go.
And you're going to think, surely it's a bit early to be looking for a promotion. And you would be absolutely correct. That pawn has not advanced with the view to getting a new queen just yet. But what does it do? Well, it fulfills two quite useful functions. One is it inhibits the kind of like white advance on the king side. And secondly, it prevents white from kind of getting in a bishop h6 move, because now, of course, we have a rook as well as a bishop controlling that h6 square. So h5, white says, well, you do what you do. And now black chills out with bishop d7. So another useful developing move without committing the king on e8. And this is an awkward situation for white insofar as he really wants to come up with a plan. He wants to come up with a plan. Who doesn't want to come up with a plan? But it's difficult to attack on the king side because, of course, you can't make too many weaknesses there when the black king isn't even on that side of the board. And of course, the black rook is there. So what he does here, he played a very sensible move. He just played the move King B1, which is about to enter your screens right now. A Bishop C4, you would imagine, would be sensible, although it could be argued sort of that if he was going to play a Bishop C4 system, maybe he could have played that move a little bit earlier instead. But Bishop C4, of course, would not be a ridiculous move at all. But instead, White played a very typical move, a kind of King B1, very useful, kind of semi-waiting move, saying to Black, come on then, what are you going to do now? Show me that you're going to castle. And Black says, well, no, I'm not going to castle. I'm going to keep activating my pieces with the rook c8, of course, coming to the half open file. So the question is, again, back to White. What's he going to do? How's he going to make progress? Has he got any particular plans? Well, he played the move here, knight b3, withdrawing the knight for the center, keeping from the center, keeping more pieces on for the time being. What other possible moves could we have thought about? Well, the problem is, what's he going to do? He could argue that it could be argued that if I can't do a kingside attack, I really need to be breaking in the center of the board somehow.
I thought about, yeah, exactly.
So maybe
E5 is too early, but yeah, F4, E5.
Yeah, the problem with playing a move F4, of course, is first of all, it leaves a big gaping hole on that G4 square. Remember, White has to really value this bishop. Possibly he could take a little time out with H3, with a view to going F4, or even with a view to Bishop E2 and then playing G4 anyhow. Okay. That would certainly be a possible plan. I think maybe I prefer those sort of plans. As we're going to see, this game goes horribly wrong for poor old Max. Max, how are you doing?
Oh, good, man.
Now, so it not yet. It doesn't go horribly wrong just yet, but it does do very shortly. The knight comes to B3. I don't believe this is a bad move in itself. And of course, it's over to Black to make another useful move. Well, Black plays Queen C7. Again, then, keeping the king in the middle, not showing his hand as far as the monarch is concerned in the center.
That is interesting.
Yeah. The other thing is, I'm not myself normally a great fan of putting the queen in front of the rook because, you know, I like to do my little exchange sacrifices on C3, and a queen for a knight. Well, that doesn't have a word like the exchange sacrifice, but it probably but there's a lot more points conceded, put it that way, and it's probably not so great. So Queen C7 was played, and still we're having kind of game of cat and mouse, which is quite appropriate for where you are right now without the mouse part. Now, and the fact is that what are we going to do here for White? Well, White now, what other possibilities? I would have thought maybe a move like Bishop G5 seems maybe reasonable, with a view to possibly taking that and dumping the knight into D5. Then I guess Black would transfer the bishop over to E6 to control it, because it's really important to preserve this dragon bishop. That might be possible, but instead White takes the approach. Well, he moves the queen out the way for now. We're going to see why he does this in a second.
Okay, here I just need to ask, sorry, little intervention, but why? I mean, okay, it's a useless move after all, but why not knight to b5? I mean, that's very obvious. Of course, you're attacking the queen, and the queen just is... There's only one move. It has to be b8, and this is like good for Black if the queen...
Yeah, but the idea is after queen b8, then Black can go a6.
Yeah.
And the knight's going to have to come back. And at the very least, if it wants, you can just come back out.
So it is good for Black, actually, that, yeah.
Well, I mean, they're both kind of losing. Let's suppose that for the sake of argument, we'll have a hokey cokey. The knight goes to b5, the queen goes to b8, the knight goes to c3, the queen goes to c7. And in between that, a6 will occur, which means we won't have the hokey cokey again next time around.
I understand. So I understand,
So knight b5 would only really be useful if there's somewhere for the knight to go to. For example, if it's deemed that transferring it back to d4 is an amazing plan, or as is the case in actual fact, after queen f2, knight b5 now threatens to win that a7 pawn.
Yes. Okay, gotcha.
And I wouldn't say it's going to be a good idea to transfer this knight here, because as we know in the Dragon, the key square is the d5 square, really. That's where White really wants a knight to end up long term. So that's why I played queen f2. I think he's kind of struggling. He's struggling to find plans in this game in general, and he plumps for one which does not work very well at all. Black did play a6. So the disadvantage of that is, for what it's worth, it concedes that square here. But is that such a big deal? And yeah, so the queen is not too unhappy to drop back to b8. And of course, Black is looking to do a little bit of expansion on the king side. So here's where I think White makes a mistake, which actually really ends up, even now you'd say ends up proving fatal in the long term.
Oh,
But the logic is perfectly reasonable, and that's, as we've been discussed, if a kingside attack is not possible, then what does white want to do? White wants to open up the center of the board. So the knight comes into d5, and really the idea is white is dreaming of getting some action along that e file for the rook. So he's looking to open up the e file, obviously with an e takes d5 coming up, and then the rook's pound down on that e7 pawn, and then the black king, well, it could castle, but then the e7 pawn is going to be a problem. And of course, if he does castle kingside, he's moved a pawn around his king. Maybe there's some g4 coming in, h4, g4, h5. However,
I see some troubles with that, maybe.
go and tell me what's going to be the
So
trouble with that
I
move.
assume we can take without too much danger the knight on d5, and then our knight moves to b4, and that can probably lead to some sacrifices on the way. That's my idea.
Well, that was good and then vague all in the same time. But that's quite nice. The good news is that you're on exactly the right path.
Okay.
The knight does take on d5. Probably white should have bailed out and taken back with the rook here, but of course that was certainly
difficult.
not the idea.
Yeah.
That was certainly not the idea. But you are absolutely right. This move suddenly becomes very, very annoying. Knight b4. So, and the problem is, of course, that suddenly this queen and rook are both unleashed, as well as the knight against the c2 pawn. And whilst the knight is here, it's also scrutinizing a2 and, of course, this d5 pawn. So, right, and we're approaching the third reason for me wanting to pick this game. Well, I could not resist this game. Now, probably here, well, the problem is the pawn can't really go to c4 because then bishop f5 check. Let's just pop that on the board.
That's that. Okay, I will say that makes sense. Yeah, that's
because
terrible.
we're either going to take a2 with check, or we're just going to drop into c2 check, which will be discovered check nightmares, I guess. So c4 is out of the question.
But also c3 then, right?
Yeah, well, of course, equally c3. So proper, and of course we do need to protect that c2 pawn,
Yeah.
and probably then white should probably bail out with a move like bishop d3. But the problem is that just leaves this pawn, hands that pawn over straight away.
Difficult.
So where would your average reasonable chess player, YouTube blogger choose to defend their c2 pawn? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Knight a1, of course. No, knight a1. Now, this is not the sort of move you usually want to see. Well, you do as a dragon player against somebody else, but not with yourself. And I mean, that is not what you call the ideal square for a knight. But this game is just, I found this game so funny. So bishop, knight a1. So, of course, the next move for black, why not? Let's continue over here, pounding the pressure on c2. So it's a case of all hands to the pump. We're rook d2 now. So let's keep track. We're attacking with a knight and a bishop, a queen and a rook. That's 4. And it's defended with a knight, a rook, a queen and a king. Just about enough at the moment for white. But now, queen a5. Oops. And now we have a little fork in mind. We've got a small matter of queen takes a2, followed by queen takes knight checkmate, which is quite handy. But also we're attacking this pawn here on d5.
Oh,
and there's no way to be protecting both of those at the same time. So white had to play a3 to stop it. And black said, yeah. So I think I'll take this. So pretty sure that white was regretting not having just given that pawn when his knight was on a slightly better square, well, significantly better square. So knight takes d5. But this game, I'm not going to spoil it. Let's just see where this game takes us. Knight takes d5. So, of course, now the dragon bishop is unleashed. This bishop is unleashed. We've got various possibilities. We're attacking this bishop on e3. And, of course, let's say an attempt by white to kind of like push away the queen from protecting for the knight falls to about 55 billion different possibilities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That cannot be happening, that's for sure. So instead, white played bishop d4. Okay, let's try and get the dragon bishop off. Let's try and centralize the queen. The king's still in the middle of the board. Maybe there's some chances. And black says, no, I don't think so. Thank you very much. Off you go. E5, of course, which is a move we've seen a lot in the main line of 9 castles, D5 variations, where black chooses to keep this bishop on the board. And there's nowhere obvious for this bishop to go to, but the queen is able to go to E1, pinning the pawn on E5, which black consequently simply unpins with the move castles.
There we go. So which move is this?
And this is move 19. And this was where the time was right for castles kingside.
Yeah,
the king now
thing,
is safe as houses over here, with white having no possibility to attack it. And of course, the bishop in a bit of a pickle, to say the least, here on
frustrating.
D4. But at least white has now got a retreat square for that bishop. So the bishop comes back to F2. And now just a little bit of housekeeping, really. Black's got 2 lovely center pawns and just would wish to be rolling down the board. And so starts with dropping this bishop back to E6. It was on a good diagonal, but C2 was adequately protected. Let's keep going here. White plays the move rook D3 because he thinks we'd better get the queens off because otherwise I'm going to get checkmated. Not a nice thing to want to do when you're already a pawn down, of course. Normally you want to avoid fair swaps. Okay, the queens come off. Maybe black could have kept them on. But let's see what happens now. Rook FD8. And, of course, black is getting ready to move the knight out of the way and start rolling the pawns down the board. Let's see what happened. The pawn went to G3 to stop that knight from going to F4. And the knight retreated to E7. So we're about to start getting these pawns rolling down the middle of the board.
Surprising, actually, because you might think there is like this attack going and where are the next tactics, but probably there was just this idea like, well, I have a pawn more. I'm just winning this.
With the queen, the queens are off the board, to be fair. So the queen is the main attacking piece.
Yeah, I mean, like shortly before, as you said already, like he could have kept the queens on.
Yeah, he maybe could have kept the queens. Yeah. But we're going to see that certainly you get tactics and certainly you get attacks even with the queens off the board, as we're going to see in a minute. So, for example, white played bishop b4 now, which attacks the d6 pawn and is pinned to the knight. But after knight c6, white can't, for example, take this pawn on d6. Oh, I feel like Svetlana right now. Let's do some tactics.
It's so easy.
Can we see why rook can't take that pawn on d6?
Well, we simply take back, and if the bishop takes on d6, our rook goes to d8, threatening checkmate, or at least taking the bishop on d6.
You are amazing. Equally, after rook takes d6, we could play knight takes b4.
Yeah,
rook takes, which is pretty much the same thing, which is going to be the back rank mate, because the bishop on f1 is still at home and the king on b1 can't go to a2 because of our bishop on e6. Now, can you see why the bishop can't take on d6 directly?
Not directly, but I think bishop f5 is very crushing, and then knight to d4 will probably be very crushing too. There's a lot of crushing moves. I don't think
there's probably a lot of crushing moves.
Yeah.
The other thing is after bishop f5, the rook has to go to a square which is unprotected, in which case bishop f8 would just win that bishop on d6 straight away. So he can't really go, he can't go taking that. So the bishop drops all the way back to e1. We have bishop f5 attacking the queen. And now here we go. First of all, e4, unleashing a discovered attack against that rook.
Release the dragon.
Goes to b3. And now we can see how so delightful, of course, this knight remains on a1 at the moment. And black now played b5, gaining even a little bit more space. Now, the problem is, really, you'd think white would like to take this pawn on d5 to keep these pawns a little bit disjointed. But after bishop takes, there's only one square for the rook, and then the other bishop could come to d4, and then there's no squares for the rook, actually. So, unfortunately for white can't even take that pawn here. So white plays f4, and we get these center pawns rolling down the center of the board. Bishop g2 by white finally getting that bishop out and allowing the rook to come into the game, which of course it can't do while the other bishop's stuck on e1. And now the bishop dropped back to e6. Equally, I think pushing the pawn to d4 would have been fine. But look what black has in mind with this. Well, this is the next move on the agenda. So kind of shutting that light square bishop out absolutely for good.
That's a
and bringing
slow
the
kill.
option of rolling down here. So I think we can have a look at comparison of the pieces, and it's looking pretty favorable from black's point of view at the moment. But have a look at this. c3, hang on. Suddenly white is thinking of getting their knight into the game. But black says, no, not just yet, thanks very much. d4, let's see what's going on here. Well, they can't allow connected passed pawns down the center of the board. This takes here, and the bishop takes back. And then rook e2. And now the other bishop joins the action on c4. So suddenly we can compare the bishop pairs at the moment. And then black's also got rooks, knight, and it's just looking, well, let's just say everything's looking pretty favorable at the moment. So where does the rook move to? The rook goes to d2 here. Bishop d3 check.
I mean, at one point the rook has to take, right? I mean,
well, probably, but of course that's
it's not.
Let's
not
be honest,
helpful.
it's grim at the moment. I think rook takes d3 is going to be tantamount to resignation, because not only are you giving the exchange away, but you're giving a pawn down the board. But yeah, it's looking. We're coming up to the final reason for me loving this game in a second. B4 was now played up by black, because black is of course looking forward to a nice little checkmate. And white played bishop f1. I think, to be fair, I still think this idea, if white could manage to get these swapped off, and there's always hope, while the game goes on and you're only one pawn down, there's always hope. B takes a3, B takes a3. And this next move just purely rubs in white's dominance. I mean, who would even think of a move like this?
Can I make a guess?
Okay, go for it.
Well, I'd have to calculate, but I think the knight b4 check and then rook c1 is very brutal.
Can I just tell you, you are becoming a little bit of a tactical genius, but it's not even that. There's nothing even special about this next move. But I'm going to show it to you, because the first thing you think is, really? Was that the best move?
Yes.
So we've got our wonderful dragon bishop. He just gave his bishop up for that knight in the corner of the board. But the reason was pretty clear. Basically, what's going to happen, as you're going to see here, well, white, it didn't really matter whether he'd taken on a1. I took on d3 first of all. He took on d3 first. We take back. Then he takes a1. And this is the idea. The knight now is coming into d4.
Juicy.
And as we can see, we've got some pretty mean looking forcing variations here that are likely to result in a new black queen or checkmate. King b2, and then the knight came to f3. Okay, so there's not many squares available to that white rook. The white rook had to go back to d1, and then rook c2 check. Now, as I say, I would have, like you, I would have liked to maybe have seen a different tactical end to this game. But this is so nice, I have to say. So if, for example, white had decided, well, he's not got that many choices. Let's be blatantly honest for where to put his king at the moment. But had he have played king b3, look at this for something which would quite nice. Knight takes e1 check, rook takes e1, rook b8 check. There's only one square for the king, and then rook b5.
That's
with a wonderful mating neck.
Disgusting.
I mean, you would have thought white was suddenly giving all white that hope of getting to a rook and pawn endgame, and they're all drawn and all the rest of it. It's not quite over. Rook b1, after rook b1, because that stops the rook c4 mate because of rook b4. But then d2, and then the rook has to go there, and then takes, and here, and that is New Queen City, Arizona, with the pawn coming down to d1. So that would have been the answer to that. So rook c2 check. So not that many other options. So instead, the king dropped back to b1 here. So then we have rook b8 check. Now, I tell you what I would have liked to have seen here. This is another checkmate that I would have loved to have seen. Look at this. Knight takes e1 check. Rook here. Rook b8 check. king has to go to a1, followed by d2. Now, this would have been smooth. So we're attacking the rook.
Oh,
So it's pretty
that
clear
is
that we want to
cute.
go here. So the white rook, unfortunately, it can't come to the 7th rank or go anywhere of interest. It would have
Mhm.
to stay along the back rank. And then after here, we're simply threatening checkmate by
Yeah,
doing the little slide over to the right. You go there, I go there. And of course,
you like
no,
it
it's not
because it's like a
perpetual.
dancing move.
It's a dancing, oh man, dancing move. That's a good way of putting it. Do a sideways shuffle with the rook side. So basically, that would have been a nice checkmate as well if we'd had
Indeed.
that. Now, but instead, oh my word, instead we see rook to b8 check, pretty good all the same. King a1 and then rook b3. Continuing with the domination, everything's under control. We've got this pawn still to roll down the board. We've got the pawn on a3 to take. The bishop tries to get a little bit of action, but bishop b4, at least it protects the a3 pawn. But black says, no, no, a5. What are you going to do? You're going to take that pawn? Well, I don't think so. Rook a3, and the bishop drops, of course, immediately. So the bishop has to stay somewhere along that diagonal. Now, knight d2. Look at this. This is
Oh,
game. Look, this is well. This is more dancing. This is what I love about this position.
yeah.
Rook e1, and then the knight actually dances to this square, and then suddenly we can see. Oh my word! The bishop is attacked with very few squares to go to, but also there's going to be mating nets going on over here. And finally, white thought, Max Weidenhoefer thought, I've had enough of this. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
You know, I felt totally humiliated by this game. And he threw the towel in at this moment. And I can't really blame him, to be honest
No,
with you.
of
So
course not.
so what I want to say, that that's not going to win any awards for theoretical game of the year or anything like that. But it just shows that you can keep your king in the middle, play a little bit of this h5 business, play on the edges, and challenge your opponent to do something good. And if they mess around, then you can progress, because you can be sure that even if white hadn't played knight d5 and handed over the reins to black would have continued expanding with b5 and worked a little bit on the queen side, and would not have castled until he felt it would be safe. And this is a Latvian GM playing this system. It's not like, a Mickey Mouse is, well, Mickey Mouse might be quite good. I don't want to say anything. And we're back to cat and mice again. But other than that, yeah. So I just thought that game was an amazing little game.
Absolutely. So what would you call this system? There's no name for it. It's just like a little bit of a variation of a
Yeah, I
Dragadorfish,
call this
Hungary-ish.
yeah. Now, if we just quickly retreat back
Yeah.
to here. So, for example, and this shows how the dragon has developed over time. And I don't mean, we have all of a sudden came along the Dragadorf, and then all of a sudden came against the Hungarian dragon. For quite some time, for example, there were systems whereby black would delay castling kingside, just leaving the king in the middle without even deploying that pawn. So get on with doing some of the kind of other type moves that are available, maybe getting the queen side expansions, but just not leaving the king as a target on g8, because white obviously loves to do that. Oh, Stacey, white loves to do their h4, h5, all that sort of thing. So there's long been systems whereby black would just leave the king in the middle. But it's the more modern approach of these systems is to actually, dynamically, aggressively thrust your h-pawn down there for seemingly no reason at all, but just to basically inhibit white from doing the kingside expansions, g4, g5, and all the rest of it. Now, what would I call it? I don't call it one now. I tend to call it like fiddling around the edges sort of thing, because it's kind of like, you're up with your H pawn, you're up with your, your A and your B pawn, and you're just like, but the irony there was that as soon as white tried to react in the center, like we're taught to, of course, which is, you meet wing play with action in the center, that's when it started going horrendously wrong. And of course, before you know it, black was like, tricked ya, get castled, and then he was the one controlling the center.
Yeah,
so that's what I would
until
call
move 19 and then strike.
No, maybe that's it. Maybe we should 19 is the golden number, basically. Always, that's the trick. Castle on move 19, and you're absolutely completely safe.
Ah, Chris, that was so much fun again. And yeah, very, very informative indeed. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Can't wait for the newest episode, which will be about, as you mentioned already, a bit more Hungarian stuff, right?
Hungarian Dragon is on its way.
There we go. See you soon. Bye bye.